So thinking about what it means to truly be original and authentic, to take the things out in the world and bring them together in a way that you invent, that's what we're talking about, creating anything. And you have the power to do that because it's just simply a matter of practice. So at the Mission Driven Mom, and especially in our MDM Academy, there's this huge emphasis on getting out of victim orientation or the drama cycle and getting into creator orientation. And I've actually, just to celebrate today, not being victims of being creators, wore my MDM sweatshirt. So creation has a couple different components, and we are all creators as a birthright from God, right? He's the Father, He created us, we are His children, so we are creators. And unfortunately, in our culture, we have kind of been indoctrinated a little bit to think that some people are creative and some people are not creative. Now, some people might be gifted formal artists, but I want to talk about creating in the sense of creating anything, creating a relationship, creating a home, creating a life, creating a picture, creating, I don't know, a rug. It doesn't really matter. There are certain underlying principles that undergird all of that. And in terms of the creator orientation, that's something that we talk about in the Academy. Today, I want to talk about the practices of creating. The orientation is something different. So the practices of creating in terms of what the traits are, what you're like when you're creating, and the 4 steps to creating anything. So I want to read, this is from Robert Fritz. He says, "There's a common misconception many people have. They confuse the creative process with problem solving. We have been taught to think in terms of avoiding what we do not want. Many people erroneously believe that they know what they want, only to discover upon further investigation." And he actually has some exercises in his book on creating where he makes you say what you want, and then he asks you questions and shows you that you're not actually going towards something you want. You're actually trying to solve a problem of something that you don't like. Like, I want to make the world a better place. Well, what does that mean? It's just because you don't like what's happening in the world. You think the world is broken. You're not actually trying to create something that you feel passionate about. He says, when people attempt to solve problems, they are taking actions to have something go away, the problem. When they are creating, they should be taking actions to have something come into being, the creation. Now, for parents, for moms, this is something we understand creation on a very intimate level because we loved. And this is a concept about creation that I absolutely love, is that creation is about love. And you have to love something enough to bring it into being, even when you don't know if you can even do it. You don't even know if you're going to be a great parent, but you love the future child before it's even conceived. You love the child enough to bring the child into being. And then you try to create the best home life that you can and to change yourself and continue to create the best environment for this child because you loved them enough to create them. And so that's what's happening anytime we're creating. In fact, I loved this little example. Abraham Maslow, who wrote the hierarchy, who made the diagram of the hierarchy of needs and talked about self-actualization and all that stuff, he talks about creating and being a creative person. And he said he had to totally shift his mindset about what it meant to be creative based on many of the people whose lives he studied. So here's one example he gives. One woman, uneducated, poor, a full-time housewife and mother, did none of the conventionally creative things and yet was a marvelous cook, mother, wife, and homemaker. With little money, her home was somehow always beautiful. She was a perfect hostess. Her meals were banquets. Her taste in linen, silver, glass, and crockery and furniture was impeccable. She was in all these areas original, novel, ingenious, unexpected, inventive. I just had to call her creative. I learned from her and others like her that a first-rate soup is more creative than a second-rate painting, and that generally cooking or parenting or making a home could be creative, while poetry need not be. It could be uncreative. So, thinking about what it means to truly be original and authentic, to take the things out in the world and bring them together in a way that you invent, that's what we're talking about, creating anything. And you have the power to do that because it's just simply a matter of practice. You just need to know the principles and you need to practice. Fritz also says, the reason I create is simple. I want the creation to exist. In fact, I love the creation enough that I will take whatever actions are necessary to bring the creation into the world. And I really started, we can understand this from the standpoint of being parents. Business owners can totally understand this from the standpoint of bringing a business into creation. Schools, maybe you run for office, something that you love enough to bring it into reality. And it requires hard work and sacrifice every time. But there's this sense of joy and fulfillment when you make something that didn't exist, you create it and make it exist now in the real world. There's like nothing more satisfying than that. In fact, there's this really great quote. He says, there is something in the human spirit that desires change and challenge. The act of creating can generate a kind of energy and momentum and simultaneously involve you more deeply in life than ever before. And that's why it's so vital that we practice these principles of creating and that we try to create anything that we're interested in creating, because it helps us live life in new ways. He talks actually really early on about how there's kind of two types of love. One is the love that we fall into, the love that happens to us, and one is the love that we create. And by loving something enough to bring it into existence, we're working with love in a whole different, frame of reference, in a whole different space in our lives. And so it brings us more deeply into connection with life, and it makes more of us, like it changes us and it changes the world because something now exists that didn't exist before. So he talks about some traits of creating versus responding. He says, rather than react to circumstances or respond to them, create a result that is independent of circumstances. So one of the things that it might be helpful for you to think about in this reference is, let's say that you have a relationship in your life that you don't like. And normally we would go into that experience and be like, okay, well, there's this problem, and so I need to solve the problem. What are all the ways that I could solve the problem? Maybe do a little brainstorming session with yourself or whatever, rather than I want to create a certain kind of relationship. So instead of trying to fix the problems that are there, you actually begin with the end in mind. You start with the kind of relationship you want to have, and then you work on creating that. So this will make a lot more sense when we look at the traits of being in a creating practice rather than a responding practice. So when you're creating, you're very involved with what you're doing, and you're focused outwardly. You're really living in the now. You're really living in the moment, and you have this sense of timelessness. And that's really fascinating to me, because the opposite of that, when you're responding, is you're not very involved and you're focused really inwardly, and you're not really in the moment, and you're feeling like time is your enemy, and you're feeling all kinds of pressure. Because there's a lot of other spaces, like whether it's in like self-deception or other things that I've studied, this idea of being outwardly focused is really profound, because what we're told a lot in our culture today is that we need to keep looking inward, and we need to keep focusing on ourselves, and we need to keep trying to, comfort ourselves and evaluate our emotions and fix all our thoughts and everything like that. And the argument that Fritz is making here is that actually when you just decide what you're going to create and you set out to do it, and you focus outwardly on something outside of yourself. It's kind of like that quote by Viktor Frankl when he says, you can't make happiness happen. It has to be the result of submitting yourself to a cause higher than yourself. So when it's kind of like how Jesus talked about losing yourself to find yourself. When you're outwardly focused on something that's not you, that's bigger than you, that's more important than you, and you're giving like what's you to it and imbuing it with like this life and bringing it into being, it makes more of you. And so all these positive feelings and experiences are associated with the creating process. There's a feeling of freedom, of vital energy, of independence, a greater sense of yourself and who you can be and what you can accomplish. Whereas when you're focused inwardly, you don't get those things. It's so fascinating. And so when you're responding, you feel oppressed by circumstances, you feel tired and depleted, you have an unclear sense of yourself, which all aligns with a lot of what we talk about victim orientation is like. So I just thought this was such a fascinating correlation. But then the thing I love the very most about the traits of creating versus responding is that when you're creating, life seems important. And when you're not creating, life seems unimportant. And so in our society, as we see all these people, driving more and more inward, more and more like, therapy sessions for year upon year upon year. And I'm not saying people don't like therapy, and I'm not saying people don't have trauma. I'm just saying that we are creative beings. We've been created. We were born to create. Creation is our birthright. And the more we get engaged in the creative process, the more we become who we are. And so it's just such a beautiful thing to think about. Now, Fritz goes on with, there's only one thing that will make you a creator, and that is to create. So we could talk until we're blue in the face, but ultimately, we just got to do it. We just got to decide something that we want to create and just create it. And it could be, you could start with something small, you could start with something big, doesn't matter. So here's the 4 steps to practice creating. And those traits, those experiences, that emotional, mental experience that I've just described is how people describe themselves when they're creating something. Okay, the first step is to have a vision. This could be like, I'm going to bend a paper clip into an S shape. Like, it doesn't matter how small it is, but you decide what you're going to create. And the more specific and clear you are, the better. Like, if you saw it, you would recognize it. This is what you want to create. And it could be literally anything. It could be like the design of a wall. And again, like I was saying, it could be the kind of marriage that you want to have. And you probably can have with the person that you're married to. Like, you have a lot of power. We talk about that in the Academy a lot. You have a lot more power than you think you have. So you decide on this vision, you create the vision. And then, and this is something that's so vital, and he spends so much time here, you assess reality. Okay? What tools do you really have? What skills do you really have? What obstacles are you going to come up against? What's probably going to go wrong? You get really honest with yourself at the beginning. Now, this is what's ironic. You would think that this would cause you to just not do it. Oh, well, if I got to assess reality, then but again, that's why it's about love. The love is what motivates you. You love it more than you love your own self-doubts, and you love your own problems, and you don't worry about your lack of skill. You don't worry about your lack of ability. You just see the vision and you're going to try. And what happens when you have a vision and you assess reality is that there's a tension that's created. And actually, this is important. I'm going to do in the future a whole nother video about it, about the aspects of tension, but it creates tension, like a rubber band drawing these things together, right? And that tension helps with the motivation to move toward the vision of what you're creating. So you know where you want to go, and you know where you are. You're not lying to yourself. You're not sugarcoating anything. You're just being honest about, this is where I am. And there's this tension, and I can only get from here to here by walking right through that and letting that tension be a motivation to create the thing. So then you practice. So he recommends, if this is something tactical, like if you're going to create like a piece, like, I don't know, a flower arrangement or something, then you give yourself a time frame, not more than 2 hours, and you just practice. And here's the point. You do not improvise. So the temptation when you start practicing being a creator, now this might be in a relationship, and we have, again, like we deep dive into the academy and all those kinds of things, but you can do this right now because you can say, this is the relationship I want, and this is the relationship I have. And so I've got to practice moving in that direction. So I'm going to take the first step in practicing that. And it might just be to like bite your tongue. And you're not going to be really great at it. And what you want to do is follow the old neural pathways and do the thing that's most familiar. And so when people are creating something like a piece of artwork or something, let's say you're going to draw something, well, then the temptation is to improvise. In other words, to create the thing you know how to create instead of creating the thing you've envisioned. And you don't want to do that because you won't get better doing that. You're just practicing again the thing you already know how to do. And you're trying, rather than trying to make something that looks good, you try to make the thing you're trying to make. And by doing that, you move closer to it instead of away from it. Okay. And then the fourth step is you assess. So when you're all done, you stand back from it. So let's say, again, going back to the relationship thing, you want to have this better relationship. You have a vision of what that's going to be. You assess reality. You decide your first practice and you practice it. And maybe you totally blow it. And so you step away, you go alone, you do a little bit of journaling and you assess, okay, how'd it go? Where did I blow it? What did I do right? He says, sit with it and ask yourself, do you like your creation and how close did you get to the result that you envisioned? Creating is a continual process of learning what works and what doesn't work. Now, I want to be clear. A big reason why we don't create, the jobs, the businesses, the careers, the relationships, the families, the government, the society that we want, is because creating is messy and we are signing up for failure. You will make mistakes. Mistakes are the pathway to success. And so you've got to be willing, you've got to have the courage to say to yourself, this is going to be messy. I'm going to be really far from my vision as on my first attempt and maybe on my 100th attempt. I mean, the classic story that we love to tell about Einstein with 1,000 or however many was times he tried the light bulb. He had a vision. It's got to be like this. This is where I'm at. He held the tension, practice, 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 and he eventually got there. We always eventually get there when we practice enough. And so you can realize that vision, but it means you must make mistakes because you're doing things wrong and you can't know what you're doing wrong until you try. So you've got to mess up so that you can have the feedback loop tell you what you're doing wrong so that you can do better and better and better and better. And just know that, just emotionally accept it, welcome it, be teachable, be ready to learn. Unfortunately, many of us were schooled in a way that mistakes were bad, and we almost never got the opportunity to correct our mistakes. If we did something wrong on a test, it lived there in infamy forever. And we couldn't go back and correct the test and make a better grade. Why not? Why couldn't we correct our mistakes? So that's how we become great creators of whatever it is. And that's how we can create anything. I'll leave you with a couple quotes from Robert Fritz that I love. At first, I am giving energy to the creation, but later the creation seems to be giving energy to me. So at first you feel like kind of exhausted. This is hard. You're scared. You're worried. You start and you see improvement and the creation gives energy to you. By the time I'm through with a project, I have so much energy that it is more natural to begin another project than to go on vacation. Why? Because vacation means to vacate. So you want to exit your life because exit your job, exit your business, exit your marriage. You want to take a vacation because you're not creating, you're responding. So get into creator mode, take those 4 steps. And most of all, back to the love that it generates in you, the love for life, the deeper sense of living and being alive that you will experience. The only love we experience, if the only love we experience and express is the love that happens to us, not the love we are able to originate, then we miss an entire dimension of love. So that's my challenge for you. Go create something. Go down into the comments. Tell us what you created. Tell us how it went. Tell us what your fails were. Tell us what your successes were, because I would love to hear about your creative process. And if you want to learn more, we've talked today about creative practices. If you want to learn more about creative orientation and how to live in that, go to the Mission Driven Mom and start your 7-day trial in the MDM Academy, because we do a really deep dive to that really early on in the Academy. And I promise you, as you step out of victim and into creative orientation, your whole world will change.